I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Joyce. The wind was sharp that afternoon on the Colorado cliff, but not as sharp as the silence between us. Lauren stood a few steps away, her eyes swollen like she'd been crying for hours. Brandon stood closer too, calm, too steady, watching me like I was already gone. "I just need you to listen," Lauren said, but her voice trembled in a way that didn't match her eyes. Then Brandon stepped forward, and suddenly, there was no ground beneath my feet. I remember the fall, the impact, the crack of something inside me giving way, and then breathing. I wasn't dead. I wasn't alone either. A man lay a few feet away on the narrow rock ledge, barely moving, barely alive. Above us, I could hear Lauren's voice breaking, Brandon whispering something urgent. Panic surged through me, but instinct spoke louder. With the last breath I could control, I whispered, "Play dead. If that moment just gave you chills, you're not alone." Before I tell you how my own daughter tried to erase me and why I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that quiet shift? When someone you love starts looking at you like you're in their way? If you're here with me, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every comment, and I want to know who's walking this story with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family. After my husband Thomas Nichols passed away, the house went quiet in a way I had never known before. Not peaceful quiet, hollow quiet. The kind that echoes when you set down a cup and realize no one is there to hear it. The kind that lingers in the hallway long after you've turned off the lights, as if the walls themselves are waiting for footsteps that will never come back. For 40 years, Tom had been my rhythm. He was the steady hum beneath every ordinary day, and when he was gone, I didn't just lose a husband, I lost the shape of my life. For a while, I stayed in our home in Fort Collins, trying to convince myself that I could adjust. I filled my days with small routines, watering the garden, reorganizing drawers that didn't need reorganizing, watching the same shows we used to watch together. I even went back to volunteering part-time at the hospice center where I'd worked for years. But grief has a way of slipping through the cracks. And loneliness, it doesn't knock before it enters. That's when my daughter Lauren started calling more often. At first it felt like comfort. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone all the time," she said one evening over the phone. "You've done enough for everyone else your whole life. Let us take care of you for once." Those words meant something to me, maybe more than they should have. Lauren had always been complicated. Even as a child, she was strong-willed, sensitive in ways that could turn sharp when she felt misunderstood. We'd had our disagreements over the years, but I believed, perhaps stubbornly, that deep down she loved me in her own way. So when she suggested I move closer to her and her family in a small mountain town outside Denver, I listened. "You can get a place nearby," she insisted. "Be closer to Noah. He misses you." And that part was true. My grandson Noah had always been the quiet one, the observer. While other children ran loud and fast, Noah watched. He noticed things. When he hugged you, he held on just a second longer than most. I missed that. I missed feeling needed. So within a few months, I sold the house Tom and I had built together and moved into a modest one-story home about 10 minutes from Lauren's place. I told myself it was a fresh start, a way to rebuild something new out of what I'd lost. And at first, it seemed like I had made the right decision. Lauren welcomed me with open arms, or at least arms that looked open enough. She brought over casseroles, helped me unpack boxes, insisted I come over for dinner twice a week. Brandon, her husband, greeted me with an easy smile and firm handshakes, always calling me Joyce instead of Mom. but in a tone that sounded respectful on the surface. "You're part of the family," he would say. "We're glad you're here." It all sounded right. It all looked right. But something about it felt rehearsed. I didn't notice it at first. Not clearly, just small things that brushed against my instincts and then slipped away before I could hold on to them. Like how Lauren would check her phone constantly when we talked, her attention drifting her patience thin if I spoke too long about the past. Or how Brandon always seemed to be listening even when he wasn't part of the conversation. He had a way of stepping into a room without making a sound, of appearing just when a topic shifted toward anything personal. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. Grief can make you suspicious of shadows that aren't really there, I told myself. And besides, I had Noah. Every Wednesday afternoon I picked him up from school. He'd slide into the passenger seat quietly, backpack on his lap, offering me a small smile that felt more genuine than anything else in my week. "Hi, Grandma," he'd say. Not Joyce. "Grandma." Those afternoons became my anchor. We'd stop for hot chocolate in the colder months, sit in the car longer than necessary, just talking about school books and the things he didn't feel comfortable saying at home. At first, his stories were light. Teachers he liked, assignments he found boring, a friend who talked too much. But over time, there were pauses, moments where he would start to say something, then stop. "You can tell me anything," I reminded him once, keeping my voice gentle. He looked out the window for a long moment before nodding. "I know," he said, but he didn't continue. That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not suspicion, concern. At home, things appeared normal on the surface. Lauren kept the house immaculate. Every cushion in place, every surface spotless. She dressed well, spoke well, hosted small gatherings that looked like something out of a magazine. Brandon talked about work constantly. Big projects, he'd say, new developments. Things are moving fast. But there was something underneath that didn't match the image. I noticed unopened mail stacked neatly on a side table, as if ignoring it would make it disappear. I noticed the tension in Lauren's shoulders when Brandon spoke about money, even when he was smiling. I noticed how quickly conversations would shift when I asked simple questions like, "How's business going really?" "Oh, you know how it is," Brandon would reply too quickly. "Ups and downs." Then he'd change the subject. Every time. Still, I stayed. I told myself this was what family looked like after loss, imperfect, a little strained but trying. And maybe I wanted it to be true so badly that I ignored what didn't fit. Looking back now, I can see the pattern forming, the careful balance between keeping me close and keeping me unaware. The way Lauren would lean on me just enough to keep me invested, but never enough to let me see the full picture. The way Brandon measured every word, every reaction, as if calculating something I couldn't yet understand. But at the time, I didn't have the whole truth. I only had pieces, and one quiet, growing feeling I couldn't shake, that I hadn't moved closer to my family. I had moved into something I didn't fully understand, something that had already begun long before I arrived, and I was just now stepping into the middle of it. If you live long enough, you learn the difference between something that feels off and something that is wrong. At first, what I noticed in Lauren's house felt like the former small disruptions, things you could explain away if you didn't want to look too closely. But over time, those small disruptions began to gather weight, and weight has a way of forcing you to pay attention. It started with the mail. One afternoon, I arrived a little earlier than usual to pick Noah up from school. Lauren had given me a spare key weeks before, insisting it would be easier for everyone if I could come and go freely. "Make yourself at home," she'd said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. So I did. Or at least I tried to. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet for that time of day. I set my purse down on the entry table and walked toward the kitchen, calling out softly, "Lauren." No answer. I turned toward the living room, and that's when I saw it. A stack of envelopes sitting on the side table beside the couch, neatly arranged as always. Lauren never left anything out of place, but these weren't decorative. They were bills. I didn't mean to look closely. I really didn't. But one envelope had slipped slightly out of alignment, just enough for me to catch the red lettering stamped across the front. Final notice. I froze. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it, feeling that quiet tightening in my chest. Lauren had always been particular about appearances. She prided herself on keeping everything looking perfect. If something was wrong, she hid it well, too well. I told myself to look away, to respect her privacy, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But something inside me, something I had learned over years of sitting beside people in their final days, told me that ignoring what's in front of you doesn't make it go away. So I stepped closer. Carefully, I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The return address alone was enough. Utility company. Mortgage lender, a credit agency I recognized from years of helping patients navigate end-of-life finances, and each one carried the same urgency. Late, overdue, final. My stomach turned. This didn't match the life Brandon talked about, the big projects, the things moving fast, the expensive dinners, the new furniture, the polished image they presented to the world. It didn't add up. I set the envelope back exactly where I found it, aligning it with the others the way Lauren would have. Then I stepped away like I hadn't seen anything at all. By the time Noah came home, I had composed myself. Or at least I thought I had. "Hey, Grandma," he said as he walked in, dropping his backpack by the door. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile. "How was school?" He shrugged. "Fine." But there was something in his tone, something quieter than usual. We went through our usual routine. Snack at the kitchen table, homework spread out between us, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence when neither of us spoke. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen, and I couldn't stop myself from asking. "Noah," I said gently, keeping my voice light. "Are things okay here?" "At home." He didn't look up right away. He just kept writing. For a long moment, I thought he might ignore the question altogether. Then he sighed. "They argue a lot," he said finally. My heart sank, but I kept my expression calm. "About what?" Another pause. "Money," he said. "Mostly." I nodded slowly as if that confirmed something I already suspected, which in truth it did. "Do they argue in front of you?" I asked. He shrugged again, but this time it felt heavier. Sometimes he admitted. "They try not to. But you can hear it." I reached across the table and rested my hand lightly over his. "You can always talk to me," I said softly. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on his paper. "I know. But again..." He didn't say more. That silence spoke louder than anything he could have added. That evening, Lauren came home later than usual. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor as she walked in, her phone pressed to her ear. "I told you that's not acceptable," she snapped into the receiver, her voice tight. "We had an agreement." She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me sitting at the table with Noah. Her expression shifted instantly. A smile. Too quick. Too practiced. "I'll call you back," she said, ending the call without waiting for a response. "Mom," she said brightly, setting her purse down. "I didn't realize you'd be here so early." "I had some time," I replied calmly. Thought I'd help Noah get a head start on homework. That's great, she said, but there was tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Brandon came in not long after, and just like that, the air in the room changed. It was subtle if you didn't know what to look for, but I knew. Years of reading faces, voices, the unspoken spaces between words, they had taught me to notice what others missed. Brandon greeted me with his usual easy charm. "Joyce," he said with a smile. "Always good to see you," but his eyes flicked just for a second toward the living room, toward the stack of mail, then back to me. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it, and in that moment, I understood something important. They didn't know what I knew, not yet, but they were already on edge. Dinner that night was strained. Lauren overcompensated, laughing too loudly, asking Noah too many questions, filling every silence before it could settle. Brandon played along, adding comments here and there, keeping the conversation moving in safe directions. But underneath it all, there was pressure, like a storm building just beneath the surface. At one point, Lauren brought up something casually. "So, Mom," she said, cutting into her chicken, "have you thought any more about helping us out a little? Just temporarily." There it was. I kept my expression neutral. What kind of help, I asked, though I already knew. "Just a small financial cushion," Brandon added smoothly. "Things are tied up in projects right now, but once everything clears, we'd pay you back." Of course. Of course." I set my fork down carefully. "I'm not comfortable doing that," I said gently. "Not right now." The silence that followed was immediate. Lauren's smile faded just slightly. Brandon leaned back in his chair, his expression still calm, but his eyes had changed. "Just something to think about," he said. "I have," I replied, and I left it at that. But inside, something shifted. Because this wasn't just a request, it was expectation, and my refusal had just disrupted something they were counting on. I didn't know how far they were willing to go. Not yet, but that night as I drove home, one thought stayed with me. Clear. Unshakable. I wasn't just witnessing a problem. I was standing in the middle of it, and I had just made my first move, without realizing it. There's a moment quiet, almost invisible, when denial finally gives up. Not because you're ready, but because the truth has gathered enough weight that it can't be held back anymore. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening. I wasn't supposed to be there. Lauren had canceled dinner that night, saying she and Brandon had something to take care of. Her voice over the phone was clipped, distracted. I told her it was fine. I had no reason to question it, but I had left my reading glasses at their house the day before. At least, that's what I told myself when I got in the car. The truth was, something had been pulling at me all day. That quiet tension I couldn't explain had grown sharper since our conversation about money, since the look in Brandon's eyes when I said no. So I drove over. The house was dark except for the light in the living room. I parked quietly, not wanting to startle anyone, and walked up to the front door. As I reached for the handle, I heard voices inside. Raised voices. I froze. "You said she'd agree." Brandon's voice cut through the door low, but edged with anger. That was the whole point of bringing her closer. My hand tightened around the knob. "I thought she would," Lauren shot back, her voice strained. "She always does what she thinks is right." "Exactly," Brandon interrupted, "and right now what she thinks is right is standing in our way." My breath caught. Standing in our way. I stepped back from the door, heart pounding, and moved quietly toward the side window where the curtains were only half drawn. I shouldn't have listened. I knew that, but sometimes not listening is worse. She's not going to just hand it over. Lauren continued, her tone sharper now. She's been different lately. Suspicious. Then you need to handle it, Brandon said. You're her daughter. If she won't cooperate, you make her. Silence followed that. Heavy. Loaded. Then Lauren spoke again, softer this time, but more dangerous. I've tried, she said. You think I haven't tried? She still treats me like I don't deserve it. Deserve it. The word hit me harder than anything else. Deserve what Brandon exhaled slowly, as if trying to rein in his patience. We don't have time for this, he said. The bank isn't going to wait. Investors aren't going to wait. If we don't secure that land, everything falls apart. Land. My stomach dropped. Tom's land. The mountain property he had loved more than anything. The place he took Lauren when she was little. The place where he taught her how to fish, how to build a fire, how to sit in silence and just listen to the wind. That land wasn't just property. It was memory. It was legacy. And now, it was leverage. They don't even know about the clause, Lauren said, suddenly her voice lowering. My pulse quickened. Clause. Brandon let out a short laugh. They don't need to. Once it's in our control, we'll deal with whatever comes up. You don't understand, Lauren snapped. If she thinks we're pushing her, she'll dig in. She always does. That's how she is. There was a pause. Then Brandon spoke again, quieter this time, more calculated. Then maybe he said slowly, we stop pushing. I leaned closer to the window without realizing it. What do you mean? Lauren asked. I mean, Brandon continued, we change the approach. Make her think it's her idea. Or... He hesitated just long enough to make my skin crawl. We make it so she's not in a position to say no. My chest tightened. Not in a position to say no. What are you suggesting? Lauren asked. But there was something in her voice now, something that wasn't fear. It was curiosity. I'm suggesting Brandon said that people are a lot more cooperative when they're vulnerable. Silence. Long. Thick. Suffocating. I felt my heart beating in my throat. This wasn't about money anymore. This was something else. Something darker. You're talking about making her look unstable, Lauren said finally. Brandon didn't answer right away. Then I'm talking about options. I stepped back from the window as if I'd been burned. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing to catch up with what I had just heard. They weren't just desperate. They were planning how to take something that didn't belong to them. Planning how to control me. For a moment, I couldn't move. I stood there in the dark staring at the house that had felt like family just weeks ago, and now felt like something else entirely. Something dangerous. A floorboard creaked inside. I turned instinctively and moved away from the window, pressing myself against the side of the house, holding my breath. Did you hear something? Lauren's voice floated out closer now. No, Brandon said. You're paranoid. Paranoid. The word echoed in my head, because that was exactly what they were preparing to call me. I waited until their voices moved back into the living room before I slipped quietly off the porch and back to my car. I didn't remember the drive home. Not clearly. All I remember is the feeling, the shift, the moment when everything I had been trying to ignore finally settled into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress or financial pressure or a rough patch in their marriage. This was intent. And I was the target. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. Tom's picture sat on the table near the entryway. For a long moment, I just stood there looking at him. You knew, I whispered. I didn't know why I said it, but something in me felt it. Tom had always been careful, thoughtful, the kind of man who prepared for things others didn't even consider. If there was a clause, if there were protections in place. Maybe he had seen this possibility long before I ever did, and if that was true, then I needed to stop reacting and start thinking, because whatever Lauren and Brandon were planning, they weren't going to stop, not unless something stopped them first. And the hardest truth of all settled quietly into my chest. If I wanted to survive this, I couldn't be just a mother anymore. I had to become someone they didn't expect. The hardest part wasn't what I had heard. It was what I had to do next. Because once you know the truth, you don't get to unknow it. And from that moment on, every choice becomes a decision between comfort and survival. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I had overheard, every pause, every tone. They don't even know about the clause. If she won't cooperate, you make her, not in a position to say no. Those weren't careless words, they were calculated, and that meant one thing: I was already behind. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. Confrontation only works when the other side still has something to lose. Lauren and Brandon had already crossed that line. So instead, I was going to gather the truth. Quietly, carefully, completely. The first place I started was my own home. Tom had always kept our documents organized, too organized I used to tease him. Every paper labeled, every file stored in its proper place. After he passed, I hadn't had the heart to go through everything in detail. Now, I had no choice. I pulled out the storage boxes from the hall closet and carried them into the living room. Dust rose in the air as I opened the first lid, the faint scent of old paper and cedar hitting me all at once. It felt like opening a part of my life I had sealed away. For a moment I hesitated. Then I began. File by file, folder by folder, I worked through everything. Bank statements, insurance policies, property records. And then I found it. The folder labeled in Tom's careful handwriting, Mountain Property, Restricted Transfer. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were the original deed documents, along with several additional pages I didn't remember ever seeing. Legal language, dense, precise. I sat down slowly, pulling my reading glasses from the table beside me, and began to read. At first, it was exactly what I expected: ownership details, boundary descriptions, zoning notes. But then, I saw it. A clause. Clear, intentional, and unmistakable. The property could not be transferred, sold, or leveraged if there was any indication that the owner, me, was under coercion, undue influence, or mental incapacity. Any such attempt would trigger an automatic legal review and freeze the process entirely. My breath caught. Tom. He had known. Not specifically about Lauren, not about Brandon, but about people, about pressure, about what can happen when grief, money, and family collide. He had protected me, even after he was gone. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a sharp mix of gratitude and heartbreak. You always thought ahead, I whispered. And now, I had to catch up. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing everything in that folder, committing as much as I could to memory. Then I did something I hadn't planned but knew I needed to. I called Richard Lawson, Tom's attorney. He answered on the second ring. Lawson and Associates. Richard. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's Joyce Nichols. There was a brief pause, then warmth. Joyce, he said. I was sorry to hear about Tom. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I replied. But I need to ask you something important. His tone shifted immediately. Of course, I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. Instead, I asked carefully, has anyone contacted you recently about the mountain property? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, he said finally. My heart skipped. Who, I asked. I can't disclose full details without authorization, he replied, professional but not dismissive. But I can tell you this, it wasn't you, and it wasn't anyone listed in Tom's direct legal instructions. Cold spread through my chest. Did they try to initiate anything I asked? They inquired about transfer possibilities, he said, and about how the restriction clause might be navigated. Navigated. That word alone told me everything I needed to know. They didn't get far, Richard added. The clause is very specific. It would raise immediate flags. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Good, I said, quietly. Joyce, he continued, his voice lowering slightly. Is there something you want to tell me? I hesitated. This was the moment. The line between staying silent and stepping into the truth. I think someone is trying to gain control of that property, I said carefully, and I don't think their intentions are ethical. There was no hesitation this time. Then you need to be very careful, Richard said, and you need to document everything. If there's any pressure, any at all, it strengthens the protection Tom put in place. I understand, I said. And Joyce, he added, don't sign anything. No matter how small it seems, not without me reviewing it first. I won't. When I hung up the phone, the house felt different. Not safer, but clearer. The pieces were starting to connect. Lauren and Brandon had already tried to access the property. They knew about the clause, but not enough to bypass it easily, and now they were looking for another way, another angle, another strategy. Which meant one thing. They weren't going to stop. I stood up slowly and walked back to the living room, my gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the street looked the same as it always had. Quiet, ordinary, unchanged. But inside me, everything had shifted. Because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. And knowing changes how you move. That afternoon, I made copies of every important document. Not just the property records, but bank statements, identification, anything they might try to use or manipulate. I placed one set in a sealed envelope and hid it in a place no one would think to look. The second set, I prepared to send to Richard. Insurance. Preparation. Protection. By evening, I had done everything I could for now, but as I sat alone in my living room, the silence didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt tense, like the pause before something inevitable, because Lauren and Brandon didn't know what I knew. But they would, eventually, and when they did, they wouldn't ask nicely, they wouldn't hint, they wouldn't wait. Whatever they were planning, it was still coming. And the most dangerous part, I was already inside it, right where they wanted me. Once you stop trusting someone, you start seeing everything differently. Not because they've changed overnight, but because the truth has finally caught up with your eyes. After my call with Richard, I didn't rush into anything dramatic. I didn't accuse, didn't confront, didn't even change my routine in any obvious way. That was the hardest part, pretending nothing had shifted, because inside me everything had. I still went to Lauren's house twice a week. I still picked Noah up from school on Wednesdays. I still sat at their dinner table, smiled when expected, and nodded through conversations that now felt like carefully staged performances. But I wasn't the same woman sitting there anymore. I was watching, listening, measuring. And the more I paid attention, the more I saw. It started with Brandon. Before I had dismissed his behavior as confidence, maybe even charm. But now I noticed the precision in everything he did. The way he guided conversations, subtly steering them away from certain topics. The way he would interrupt Lauren not loudly, not obviously, but just enough to redirect her when she got too close to saying something real. He didn't just talk. He managed. And Lauren, she followed. That realization hurt more than anything I had uncovered so far. Because I had spent years believing that if there was ever tension between us, it came from misunderstanding, from personality differences, from the normal friction between a mother and a daughter trying to navigate adulthood. But this was something else. This was alignment. One evening I saw it clearly. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. Noah had gone upstairs to finish homework, and the three of us were left in that polished, too-perfect space Lauren worked so hard to maintain. Brandon was talking about one of his projects again. Once this deal closes, he said, leaning back comfortably, we'll be in a completely different position. Everything stabilizes from there. Lauren nodded quickly. It's just a matter of timing. I watched them both carefully. You've been saying that for a while now, I said gently. Brandon smiled. That's how these things go. Are you sure? I asked, keeping my tone calm. Because from what I understand, timing usually doesn't come with overdue notices. The room went still, just for a second. But it was enough. Lauren's eyes snapped to mine. Brandon didn't move at all. Overdue notices. Lauren repeated, her voice tight. I held her gaze. I saw the mail the other day, I said simply. There it was. No accusations, no raised voice. Just truth. Lauren's expression shifted, first surprise, then irritation. You shouldn't have been going through our things, she said sharply. I didn't go through anything, I replied. It was sitting out in the open. That doesn't give you the right, Lauren Brandon said quietly. She stopped immediately. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Brandon leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. Joyce, he said, his tone calm, almost reassuring. I understand why you might be concerned, but those notices are part of a larger financial cycle. Short-term pressure for long-term gain. I studied him. The words were smooth, too smooth. And the pressure, I asked, is that part of the plan too? For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not yet, but something close to it. Everything is under control, he said. I nodded slowly. I hope so, I replied, and I let it go. On the surface. But inside, I was taking note, because now they knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to realize I was paying attention. That night after I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted again. Not in me this time. In them. 2 days later, I saw the next piece. It was Noah. I picked him up from school as usual, but when he got into the car, he didn't say anything. No hi, Grandma. No small smile. Just silence. Everything okay? I asked gently as we pulled away from the curb. He shrugged, but it wasn't his usual shrug. This one was heavier. We drove in silence for a few minutes before I spoke again. You know you can tell me anything, right? He nodded, staring straight ahead. I know. Another pause. Then quietly he said, They were talking about you again. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. What did they say? I asked carefully. He hesitated. I don't know. Everything he admitted. I wasn't supposed to hear. That's okay, I said softly. Just tell me what you remember. He swallowed. Dad said that you're being difficult, he said. That you don't understand how things work now. I exhaled slowly. And your mom. Noah hesitated longer this time. Then, she said, you've always been like that. The words landed quietly, but they cut deep. I kept my eyes on the road, forcing myself to stay steady. Did they say anything else? I asked. Noah nodded slightly. They said, if you won't help, they'll have to figure out another way. Another way. The phrase echoed in my mind, different from what I had heard before, but carrying the same weight. Did they say what that meant? I asked. He shook his head. No, he said, but... Grandma. Yes. His voice dropped even lower. I don't think they're just talking about money anymore. I felt something tighten in my chest. Why do you say that? I asked. He looked down at his hands. I heard Dad say something about papers, he said slowly, and Mom said, it might be easier if you just didn't fight it. Didn't fight it. I closed my eyes for just a second, then opened them again. Thank you for telling me, I said gently. He nodded, but he still looked uneasy. Are you in trouble? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. No, I said quickly. No, sweetheart. I'm okay. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was true, because the pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming a picture, a clear one. Lauren and Brandon weren't just hoping I would help them. They were planning for the possibility that I wouldn't, and whatever that plan was, it was moving forward. With or without my consent. That evening, after I dropped Noah off, I sat in my car for a long time before driving away. The house in front of me looked the same as it always had. Warm lights, perfect exterior, a picture of stability. But now I knew what was behind it. Pressure, desperation, intent, and something darker, just beginning to take shape. For the first time since all of this started, a thought came to me that I couldn't push away. Not fear, not denial, but clarity. I wasn't just dealing with a family conflict. I was dealing with people who were running out of options. And people like that, they don't step back. They escalate. Slowly, quietly, until one day, there's no going back. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't make you run. It makes you still, careful, measured, because you realize that every move you make is being watched, weighed, and possibly used against you. That was the kind of fear I lived with after my conversation with Noah. It wasn't panic. It was awareness. And awareness, when handled properly, can become something else entirely. Strategy. I knew by then that Lauren and Brandon weren't just frustrated with me, they were adjusting their plan, and that meant I had to adjust mine. The next time I saw them, I didn't act stronger. I acted weaker. That decision didn't come easily. There is something deeply unnatural about pretending to lose control of your own mind, especially when you've spent your entire life holding everything together for everyone else. But if they wanted to paint me as unstable, I decided to give them a version they would believe, just enough to make them lower their guard. It started small. A forgotten word here, a repeated question there. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just subtle inconsistencies. At dinner that night, I paused mid-sentence and frowned slightly. Now what was I saying? I murmured as if I genuinely couldn't remember. Lauren noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked to Brandon. Quick, sharp. then back to me. Then, "You were talking about the hospice center," she said carefully. "Oh," I replied, letting out a soft laugh. "Of course." Silly me. Brandon didn't say anything, but I could feel him watching, evaluating. Good. Let him. Over the next few days, I continued. I misplaced my keys on purpose. I called Brandon Bryan once, then corrected myself with mild embarrassment. I told the same short story twice in one afternoon and laughed it off when Lauren pointed it out. Each time I saw it, that look, that calculation, they were starting to believe it. And with belief came opportunity for them and for me, because while they were watching my behavior, I was documenting theirs. Every conversation that felt off, every request that came with pressure, every moment where their tone shifted from concern to control. I kept a small notebook in my purse. Nothing obvious, just a simple list of dates and observations. Quiet evidence, the kind that builds over time. But that alone wasn't enough. I needed something stronger, something they couldn't twist or explain away. That's when I started copying documents. Every paper I had at home bank records property files identification I made, duplicates. Carefully, systematically. I didn't rush. Rushing creates mistakes. And mistakes, in my situation, could be dangerous. Once I had everything organized, I sealed one full set in an envelope and hid it where no one would think to look. The second set I prepared to send to Richard. Insurance. Layers. Because if anything happened to me, the truth needed to survive. A few days later, Lauren called. Her voice was softer than usual. Warmer. "Mom," she said, "we've been thinking. Maybe we should all spend some time together. Just us. No stress. No pressure." I leaned back in my chair, letting a small pause settle before responding. "That sounds nice," I said. "It could be good for you," she added quickly. "A change of scenery. You've seemed a little overwhelmed lately." There it was, the narrative, gently introduced. I let out a quiet sigh. "I have been feeling a bit off," I admitted. Not entirely untrue, just not in the way she meant. "Well," Lauren said, her tone brightening. Brandon had an idea. "We could go up to the mountain trail this weekend. You remember it, right? Dad used to take us there all the time." My chest tightened at the mention of Tom. Of course I remembered. That place wasn't just a trail. It was a piece of our life. Carefully chosen. Deliberately chosen. "Yes," I said slowly. "I remember. It'll be good for you," she continued. "Fresh air. Time together. We haven't had that in a while. Time together. Isolated. Away from everything else." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. This was it. Not the end, but the next step. The shift from preparation to action. And yet I couldn't say no, not without confirming everything they already suspected. "Okay," I said softly. "That sounds nice." There was a flicker of something in her voice when she responded. Relief. Or maybe anticipation. "Great," she said. "We'll pick you up Saturday morning." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt different again. Not tense this time. Focused. Because now I knew. Whatever they were planning, it was moving forward, and I was walking into it. That evening, Noah came by with Lauren. He didn't say much at first, but when Lauren stepped outside to take a phone call, he leaned closer to me. "You're going with them this weekend?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "That's the plan." He looked down his fingers, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. "Grandma." He said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Don't go alone." The words sent a chill through me. "I won't be alone," I said gently. "Your mom and Brandon will be there." He shook his head slightly. "That's not what I mean." I studied him carefully. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated. Then I heard them talking again. My heart skipped. "What did you hear?" They said, "It has to happen soon," he said. "That they can't wait anymore." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Did they say what it is?" I asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "But..." Dad said something like, "Once it's done, everything will be easier. Once it's done." I felt the weight of those words settle into my chest. Heavy. Final. "Thank you for telling me," I said softly, placing my hand over his. He looked up at me, then his eyes filled with something no child should have to carry. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. I held his gaze. And for the first time since all of this began, I answered honestly. "I don't know," I said. His fingers tightened slightly under mine. "I don't like it," he whispered. "Neither do I," I replied. We sat there in silence for a moment, the unspoken truth hanging between us. Then I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "But I need you to trust me," I said. "Okay." He nodded slowly. "Okay." When Lauren came back inside, the moment passed. Just like that. But the warning stayed with me. Loud. Clear. Unavoidable. Saturday wasn't just a family outing. It was something else. Something planned. Something urgent. And whatever it was, I was at the center of it. Right where they needed me to be. Saturday morning arrived too quietly. No storm. No warning. Just a pale Colorado sky stretching wide above the mountains, as if the world had decided to stay indifferent to whatever was about to happen. I woke before my alarm, not because I had slept well, but because I hadn't slept at all. The house was still dark when I sat up in bed, the silence pressing in around me. For a moment I stayed there, letting my eyes adjust, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the distant sound of wind brushing against the windows. This is the day, I thought. Not the end, but the moment everything would reveal itself. I moved slowly, deliberately as I got ready. I chose simple clothes, comfortable, nothing that would draw attention. A light jacket, sturdy shoes. I tied my hair back the way I used to when Tom and I went hiking, the memory hitting me unexpectedly as I caught my reflection in the mirror. "You always said I looked ready for anything," I murmured softly. I only hoped he had been right. Before leaving, I walked into the living room and paused. The envelope sat where I had hidden it untouched. Good. I picked up my phone and typed a short message to Richard, going to the mountain trail with Lauren and Brandon today. If you don't hear from me by tonight, please check in. I hesitated for a second. Then I hit send. Insurance. One more layer. When the car pulled up outside, I saw it through the window, Brandon's SUV, clean, polished, predictable, right on time. I took a steady breath, grabbed my bag, and walked out. Lauren was already in the passenger seat. She turned as I approached, offering me a smile that looked almost genuine. "Morning, Mom," she said. Mom. Not Joyce. The shift was small but intentional. "Good morning," I replied, matching her tone. Brandon nodded at me from behind the wheel. "Ready for some fresh air?" he asked. "Always," I said. I climbed into the back seat, closing the door gently behind me. And just like that, there was no turning back. The drive started normally. too normally. Music played softly through the speakers, something light forgettable. Lauren chatted about small things at first. A new cafe that had opened downtown, a neighbor who had painted their house the wrong shade of blue. Ordinary conversation, carefully chosen. I responded when expected, kept my voice even, my expressions calm. But I was watching. Always watching. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed Brandon glance at the rearview mirror, not at the road behind us, but at me. Then he reached forward and tapped something on the dashboard. My phone buzzed lightly in my bag. I didn't react immediately, but inside, I noted it. Tracking. Or checking. Or something else. Did you tell anyone we were going out today? Brandon asked casually. Eyes still on the road? The question came too smoothly to be spontaneous. I tilted my head slightly as if thinking. No, I said. Should I have Lauren let out a soft laugh? No, Mom. It's just a hike, she said. We're not disappearing off the grid. Her tone was light, but the words lingered. Not disappearing off the grid. I gave a small smile and looked out the window. The town faded behind us as we drove higher into the mountains. The road narrowed, winding through tall pines and open stretches of rock. The air grew thinner, clearer. Beautiful, the kind of place people come to breathe, to heal, or to disappear. We reached the trailhead just before noon. There were a few other cars in the lot, but not many. Enough to make it seem normal, not enough to make it safe. Brandon parked near the edge of the gravel area, cutting the engine with a quiet click. Here we are, he said. Lauren turned toward me again, her smile softer this time. You remember this place? She asked. I nodded slowly as I stepped out of the car. Of course I do. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The wind moved gently through the trees, creating a soft, steady sound that might have been calming under different circumstances. But not today. Today, it felt like a warning. We started walking. The trail was familiar, narrow but well-worn, leading upward along the side of the mountain. I had walked it years ago with Tom and Lauren, back when things were simpler, before distance and resentment had settled between us. Lauren walked ahead at first, pointing out things that hadn't changed. That tree is still there, she said. Remember how Dad used to say it looked like it was leaning on purpose? I nodded. I remember. Her voice softened slightly. He loved this place. Yes, I said quietly. He did. For a brief moment, something real passed between us. Grief. Shared. Unspoken. But it didn't last. Brandon moved closer, subtly guiding the direction of the conversation again. Let's keep moving, he said. The overlook is about 10 minutes up. The overlook. I knew exactly where that was. A narrow stretch of rock that opened out over a steep drop. Beautiful view. Dangerous edge. We walked in silence for a while after that. The trail grew steeper, the trees thinning as we climbed higher. The sky opened above us wide and pale. I could feel my heart beat, not from the exertion, but from something deeper. Something building. When we reached the top, the wind was stronger. It pushed against us, tugging at our clothes, whispering across the open space. The overlook stretched out ahead. Empty. No other hikers. No witnesses. Perfect. Lauren stopped a few steps from the edge, wrapping her arms around herself as she looked out. It's still beautiful, she said softly. Yes, I replied, stepping closer, but not too close. Brandon stood behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence without turning. This is where Dad used to bring us. Lauren continued, her voice quieter now. when things got hard. I watched her carefully. Her shoulders were tense, her breathing slightly uneven. "Do you remember what he used to say?" she asked. I hesitated. "Then, that no matter how far you fall, you have to find a way to get back up." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Yeah," she said. "Something like that." Silence followed. Long. Heavy. Then Brandon spoke. "We need to talk," he said. There it was. The moment. I turned slowly to face them. "I thought that's why we came," I said. Lauren looked at me, then really looked. Not as a daughter, not as family, but as someone standing between her and something she wanted. "This doesn't have to be difficult," she said. The words were familiar, scripted. I felt a strange calm settle over me. "I agree," I replied. Brandon stepped closer. "Then you understand what we need," he said. I met his gaze. "I understand what you want," I said. The wind picked up again, stronger this time. Lauren took a step forward. "Then stop fighting it," she said, her voice tightening. "Just sign the papers when we ask. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." There it was. No more pretending. No more masks. Just truth. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something inside me shift. Not fear. Not yet. Something deeper. Sadness. "You think this is about making things hard?" I asked quietly. Her jaw tightened. "I think you've always made things harder than they needed to be," she said. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever came next. There was no going back. There's a point in every confrontation where words stop being about communication and start being about control. We had reached that point. The wind moved harder across the cliff, pushing against us in uneven bursts, carrying Lauren's last words into the open space between us. "You've always made things harder than they needed to be." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who scraped her knees on this very trail. The one who used to run ahead of Tom and me, laughing fearless, certain the world would always catch her if she fell. But that girl wasn't standing in front of me anymore. This woman, this version of my daughter, had learned something else entirely. That if the world didn't give her what she wanted, she would take it. "No," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. "I made things honest." Lauren's expression hardened. "Honest doesn't pay debts," she snapped. "Honest doesn't fix mistakes." Behind her, Brandon shifted his weight slightly, his presence tightening the space around me. "This isn't about mistakes," I continued. "This is about choices." Lauren laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course you'd say that," she said. "You've never had to make real choices, have you? You always had everything laid out. Stability. A husband who handled everything. A life where you never had to risk anything." The accusation stunned me, not because it was true, but because she believed it. "You think I didn't struggle?" I asked softly. "I think you had it easy," she shot back. "And now you're sitting on something that could fix everything for us, and you won't even consider it." "It's not yours to fix," I said. The words landed harder than I intended. Lauren's face changed. Not anger. Something sharper. Something deeper. "Not mine," she repeated. I took a breath, choosing my next words carefully. "It's not about what you deserve," I said. "It's about what's right." For a split second, I saw at the crack, the place where reason might still reach her. But Brandon stepped in before it could widen. "Let's not turn this into something emotional," he said calmly. We're talking about a practical situation. I turned toward him. No, I said. You're talking about control. His smile didn't fade, but it changed. You're overcomplicating this, he said. We need support. You have resources. This is what families do. Families don't corner each other on cliffs, I replied. The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, unavoidable. Lauren's eyes flickered, just for a second. And that was when I knew. She hadn't expected me to say it out loud, to name it, to bring the truth into the open where it couldn't be twisted. What are you talking about? She said quickly, but her voice wasn't steady. I held her gaze. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Brandon's posture shifted again. Subtle, controlled, but closer. Too close. This conversation is going in the wrong direction, he said. Let's reset. No, I said firmly. There is no reset. The wind surged again, stronger this time, whipping around us, pulling at Lauren's hair, pressing my jacket against my body. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Lauren took a step forward, closer to me, closer to the edge. You've always done this, she said, her voice low now, almost shaking. You make everything into a lesson, everything into some kind of moral high ground, where you get to be right and everyone else is just wrong. That's not what this is, I said. Then what is it? She demanded. I looked at her, and I told the truth. This is me trying to protect what your father built, I said quietly, and what he trusted me to protect. Her expression broke, not into tears, into something else, something raw. You mean what he trusted you with instead of me, she said. The words hung in the air, and suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't just about money, or debt, or even desperation. It was about something older, something buried. Resentment. You think he didn't trust you? I asked gently. I know he didn't, she said. He left everything to you. Everything. Like I was just an afterthought. That's not true, I said. Then why didn't he give it to me? She demanded. I opened my mouth to answer, but the truth, the real truth, wasn't simple. Because Tom hadn't made that decision out of lack of love. He had made it out of caution, out of understanding, out of seeing things, maybe even in Lauren, that I hadn't wanted to see. I don't know, I said finally, and for the first time, that answer mattered, because it wasn't a lecture, it wasn't a correction, it was honest. Lauren stared at me for a long moment. Then something in her eyes shifted, not softer, colder. Then I'll fix it myself, she said. The words were quiet, but final. And before I could react, Brandon moved, fast. One hand shoved against my shoulder, hard. The force caught me completely off guard. For a split second there was nothing. No ground, no balance, no time to think. Then the world dropped out from under me. I remember the sky tilting, the edge disappearing, the sound of Lauren's breath catching, and then falling. The air rushed past me, tearing the breath from my lungs, the wind roaring in my ears so loud it drowned out everything else. I hit something, hard. Pain exploded through my side, sharp and blinding, knocking the air out of me in a violent gasp. Then nothing. Darkness. Silence. For a moment I thought, this is it. But then breathing. Shallow. Painful. But there. I wasn't dead. I opened my eyes slowly, The world swam into focus in fragments: gray rock, blue sky, the jagged edge of the cliff far above. I was lying on a narrow ledge. Not the bottom. Not yet. A miracle. Or a delay. Pain pulsed through my body, radiating from my ribs, my shoulder, my back. Something was wrong. More than one thing. But I was alive. And then, a sound. Faint. To my right. I turned my head slowly, every movement sending sharp waves of pain through me. A man, lying a few feet away. Still. Too still. Blood darkened the rock beneath him. For a second I thought he was gone. But then a breath. Barely there, but real. Recognition flickered through my mind. Ryan Cole. I had seen him before in town. A wilderness guide. Quiet. Capable. And now, broken. Like me. Above us, voices echoed faintly. Lauren. Panicked. Brandon. Controlled. We have to go, he was saying. What if Lauren started? No one survives that he cut her off. We can't stay here. Silence. Then footsteps, fading. Gone. I lay there, my body screaming, my mind racing. They thought I was dead. They wanted me dead. And if they realized I wasn't, they would come back. Or worse. Finish what they started. I turned my head slightly toward Ryan. His chest rose again. Weak. But there. Alive. Fear surged through me, but instinct rose with it. Stronger. Clearer. I didn't have time to think about justice, or betrayal, or what had just happened. I had one job. Survive. Slowly, painfully, I drew in a breath. Then with everything I had left, I whispered, play dead. Pain has a voice. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in pulses, in sharp flashes that steal your breath and make time collapse into seconds you have to survive one by one. That was where I was. Lying on a narrow strip of rock, my body broken in ways I couldn't fully measure, yet my mind trying to stay one step ahead of something far worse than the pain itself. Fear. Above us, the world had gone quiet. No footsteps. No voices. Just wind. But I knew better than to trust silence. I turned my head slowly toward Ryan. Up close, he looked worse than I had thought. His skin was pale beneath the dirt and blood. One leg lay at an unnatural angle, twisted just enough to make my stomach turn. His breathing was shallow, uneven, alive, but barely. His eyes were closed, but when I whispered again, stay still, play dead, I saw the faintest flicker in his eyelids. Good. He heard me. That was enough. I forced myself to stay still. Every instinct in my body screamed to move, to sit up, to check the damage, to do something. But I had learned long ago, sitting beside patients in their final hours, that sometimes survival isn't about action. It's about restraint. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Time didn't move the way it should anymore. Then a sound. Above us. Footsteps. My heart slammed against my ribs. They came back. I didn't move. Didn't breathe any deeper than I already was. I let my body go slack, my head tilted at an unnatural angle against the rock. Dead weight. That's what I needed to be. Nothing. Invisible. Lauren's voice came first. Are you sure? She asked, her words carried down by the wind, strained and uneven. Yes, Brandon replied. No one survives that fall. His tone was steady. Certain. As if he needed to believe it more than he actually knew it. There was a pause. then the faint crunch of gravel shifting under their feet. Closer. They were near the edge. I could feel it. Should we check? Lauren asked. The question made something cold tighten in my chest. If they climbed down, if they looked closer, it would be over. No, Brandon said immediately. It's too dangerous. She's my mother, Lauren said, her voice cracking. And she's already gone, he replied. You saw the fall. Silence. Long. Heavy. I focused on my breathing. Slow. Shallow. Still. Then, I didn't think it would be like that, Lauren whispered. For a split second, something inside me broke. Because that wasn't fear of getting caught. That was something else, something human, too late. Brandon didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter, controlled. It's done, he said. We just need to stick to the story. The story. The word settled into my mind like a stone. We were hiking, he continued. She slipped. We tried to reach her. There was nothing we could do. Lauren didn't answer. I didn't know if she nodded or if she simply stopped resisting, but after a moment I heard it. Footsteps again, moving away, slower this time, but still leaving. I waited and waited. Even after the sound faded completely, even after the wind was the only thing left. I didn't move. Not until I was sure. Completely sure. Then very slowly I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My body trembled immediately. Not from cold, from the release. They were gone. For now. But the danger wasn't over. Not even close. I turned my head toward Ryan again. Hey, I whispered, my voice barely there. Can you hear me? For a moment, nothing happened. Then his lips moved. Just slightly. Yeah, he breathed. Relief hit me so suddenly it almost hurt. Good, I said softly. Don't move. Not unless you have to. My leg, he murmured. I know, I said gently. I can see it. I shifted carefully, inch by inch, ignoring the sharp pain that flared through my side as I moved closer to him. Training took over. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but enough. I had spent years sitting beside people whose bodies were failing them. I knew how to read breath, how to measure consciousness, how to keep someone anchored just enough to hold on. Stay with me, I said quietly. Okay. He gave the smallest nod. Okay. I looked around us. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for the two of us. Above, the cliff stretched up in jagged layers. Below? I didn't look. I didn't need to. We weren't getting down that way. Not like this. Do you have your phone? I asked. He blinked slowly. No. Lost it, he said. I checked my own. Gone. Of course, the fall had taken more than just our balance. All right, I said, more to myself than to him. That's okay. It wasn't okay. But panic wouldn't help us. Someone will come, I said, forcing calm into my voice. This trail, people use it. They'll notice something, or they wouldn't. But hope is sometimes the only thing you have to offer. And right then, it was enough. The hours that followed blurred together. Sunlight shifted slowly across the rock, moving from harsh brightness to softer angles as the day wore on. The temperature dropped with it. Cold crept in, quietly, relentlessly. I did what I could, pressed fabric against a wound I could reach. adjusted Ryan's position just enough to keep him breathing easier, talked, constantly, not about anything important, just words, to keep him awake, to keep myself awake. "You said your name is Ryan," I asked at one point. He nodded faintly. "Yeah. I'm Joyce," I said. "We're going to get through this, Ryan." He let out a weak breath that might have been a laugh. "Didn't plan on cliff diving today," he muttered. I managed a small smile. Neither did I. Another stretch of silence. Then, "You fell too?" he asked. I hesitated. The truth sat heavy in my chest. "No," I said quietly. I was pushed. He didn't respond right away, but I saw it in his eyes when they flickered open again. Understanding. Anger. Witness. Good. That mattered. As the light began to fade, the cold deepened. My body ached in ways I could no longer separate. Sharp pain, dull pain, constant pressure. But I stayed awake. I had to. Because sleep meant letting go. And letting go wasn't an option. Not yet. Not when I had survived the fall. Not when I had seen the truth. Not when they thought I was already gone. I looked up at the sky as it darkened, the first stars barely visible through the fading light. And I held on to one thought. Simple. Unshakable. I didn't survive that fall by accident. I survived it for a reason. And whatever came next, I wasn't done. Dawn didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly first as a pale gray light brushing the edges of the sky, then stretching across the mountains in soft, hesitant lines. For a moment I thought I might have imagined it. But then the cold shifted, and the darkness began to loosen its grip. I was still alive. That realization hit me with a quiet force stronger than anything I had felt the night before. Not relief, at least not entirely. Clarity, because surviving the night meant something had changed. Not just for me, for everything. Ryan stirred beside me, his breathing uneven but stronger than it had been hours earlier. "You still with me?" I whispered. He blinked, wincing slightly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Feels like I got run over by a truck." I almost smiled. "That's a good sign," I said softly. "Means you're still here." The light grew stronger, revealing more of our surroundings, the jagged edges of the ledge, the steep drop below, the long climb above. Reality in full. We weren't safe. We had just lasted long enough to be found, if anyone came. I swallowed, forcing that thought away. "Listen to me," I said gently. "When the sun gets higher, there's a chance someone will come up that trail. If they do, we need to make noise." Ryan nodded faintly. "If I pass out?" "You won't." I cut in more firmly than I intended. "You stay with me." "Okay." He studied me for a second, then gave a small nod. "Okay." Time moved strangely after that. Minutes stretched. Sounds carried differently in the morning air. Birds distant and unaware. Wind softer now but still constant. And then a new sound. Faint at first. Almost impossible to place. I held my breath, listening. Voices. Far above. My heart leapt. "Hey!" I tried to call out, but my voice came out thin, cracked. "Not enough." I swallowed hard, gathering what little strength I had left. "Hey!" I shouted again, louder this time. Pain shot through my chest, stealing my breath, but it didn't matter. Down here I called. Ryan joined me, his voice rough but determined. "Help!" For a moment there was nothing. Then, "Did you hear that?" A voice from above. Clear. Real. "Yes, over here." Hope surged so suddenly it almost overwhelmed me. "We're here!" I shouted again. On the ledge, footsteps moved quickly above us. More voices. Urgent now. And then, a face appeared at the edge of the cliff. A man in a rescue jacket, his eyes scanning downward until they landed on us. "There they are," he called out. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made everything else fade. "We've got 2 survivors," he shouted back. Survivors! The word echoed in my mind. Not victims, not bodies, survivors. Within minutes, more people appeared. Ropes, harnesses, controlled movement, voices, steady, practiced. "We're coming down," one of them called. "Stay still. We've got you. Stay still." I almost laughed. That was the one thing I had done right all along. The descent was careful, deliberate. One rescuer reached us first, his expression shifting the moment he saw the extent of our injuries. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Joyce," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Joyce Nichols." "Okay, Joyce," he said calmly. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." Safe. The word felt foreign, uncertain, but I held on to it anyway. They worked quickly after that. Stabilizing Ryan first, his legs secured, his body carefully positioned. Then me, hands gentle but efficient, voices guiding each movement. "You're going to feel some pressure," one of them said as they secured me into the harness. I nodded faintly. Pressure I could handle. I had handled worse. The climb up was slow. Every shift sent waves of pain through my body, but I focused on one thing: up, higher, closer to the surface, closer to the truth. When we finally reached the top, the light felt blinding, too bright after the darkness below. I squinted, trying to adjust, and then I saw her, Sheriff Dana Carter. Standing a few feet away, her expression sharp-focused, taking everything in at once. "Joyce," she said, stepping closer. I nodded weakly. "It's me." Her eyes moved over me quickly, assessing, calculating. "Ambulance is on the way," she said. "You're going to be okay." I held her gaze. "No," I said, my voice steadier now despite everything. "This wasn't an accident." The words hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Sheriff Carter didn't react immediately, but I saw it in her eyes. The shift. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly. I swallowed, forcing the words out. "They pushed me," I said. "My daughter, and her husband." Silence fell around us. Not disbelief, not confusion. Just stillness, processing. Behind her, I saw movement. Another stretcher. Ryan being lifted. Alive. Witness, good. That mattered. Sheriff Carter's expression hardened slightly. "Do you understand what you're saying?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I remember everything." She studied me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay," she said. "Then we're going to take this very seriously." Relief washed through me, not because it was over, but because it had begun. The truth was no longer buried on that ledge. It was here, in the open, and it wasn't going away. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of the cliff, the edge where everything had changed, where I had fallen, where I had survived. And for the first time since it happened, I allowed myself to feel it. Not fear, not pain, but something else, something stronger. They thought I was gone. They thought their story would hold. They thought no one would ever hear the truth. But they were wrong, because I was still here, And now, so was everything they tried to bury. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and certainty. Certainty that someone would come in broken and leave either repaired or forever changed. I wasn't sure which one I was. The first thing I remember clearly after the ambulance ride was the ceiling. White, still, unmoving. I stared at it as voices moved around me, nurses, doctors, the quiet rhythm of machines doing what my body was struggling to do on its own. Multiple rib fractures, someone said. Left shoulder dislocation. Possible internal bruising, keep monitoring. Clinical words. Detached. But each one landed inside me like a marker. Proof. Evidence. I was alive. And not by accident. Hours passed, or maybe it was a full day before things settled enough for the room to quiet. When I finally turned my head slowly, carefully, I saw Sheriff Dana Carter sitting in the chair beside my bed. Not rushing, not pushing, just waiting. "You came back," I said softly. She gave a small nod. "Told you I would." There was something grounding about her presence. Not comforting in the soft sense, but steady, reliable, the kind of person who didn't look away from hard truths. "Ryan?" I asked. "He made it through surgery," she said. "Broken leg concussion, but he's stable." Relief moved through me slowly. Good. He was still here. He remembers things, she added. Not everything, but enough. I closed my eyes briefly. Another piece. Another thread holding the truth together. "And Lauren?" "Brandon?" I asked. Sheriff Carter didn't answer immediately. "They've already made statements," she said finally. Of course they had. "What did they say?" I asked. "That it was an accident," she replied. "That you slipped near the edge. That they tried to reach you." I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. "The story. They're sticking to it," she added. "They will," I said, "for as long as they think it'll hold." She leaned forward slightly. "That's why I need you to tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning." And so I did. Not just the fall. Everything. The financial pressure. The missing documents. The conversation I overheard. The shift in their behavior. The trip to the mountain. The moment on the cliff. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I told it the way it happened. Piece by piece. Truth doesn't need decoration. When I finished, the room was quiet again. Sheriff Carter sat back slightly, her expression thoughtful. "That's a lot," she said. "It is," I agreed. "And it's not going to be easy to prove," she added. "I know." She studied me for a moment. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" she asked. The question lingered in the air, heavy, real. Because what came next wasn't just about justice. It was about consequence. For them. For me. For what was left of our family. "They tried to kill me," I said quietly. Her eyes didn't waver. "I understand." "No," I said, shaking my head slightly. "They didn't just try. They planned it." The words felt different out loud. Sharper. Final. "They pushed me because I wouldn't give them what they wanted." I continued. "Because I stood in the way." Sheriff Carter nodded slowly. "That matters," she said. "Intent matters. And you can prove it." I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out a few papers. "We're building a case," she said, "and we're not starting from nothing." She laid the papers on the table beside me. "Financial records," she explained. "Your son-in-law's business is in serious trouble. Debt-failed investments, pressure from lenders." I nodded. I had already seen pieces of that. We also recovered partial data from his phone. she continued. Deleted messages. Not complete, but enough to show discussions about your property. My chest tightened. They knew about the clause I said. Not fully, she replied, but they were trying to work around it. That matched what I had heard. What about Lauren, I asked. Sheriff Carter hesitated. Her involvement is complicated, she said. I met her gaze. Was she part of it? I asked. A pause. Then, yes. The word didn't shock me. Not anymore. But it still hurt. In a place deeper than anything physical. She didn't try to stop it, I said quietly. No, Sheriff Carter confirmed. She didn't. I looked away, staring at the window across the room. Outside, the sky was clear, unchanged. How strange that the world could remain so normal when everything inside me had been rewritten. There's more, Sheriff Carter said. I turned back. Ryan, she continued, he remembers hearing your son-in-law after the fall. My pulse quickened. What did he hear? She glanced at her notes. Something along the lines of, no one survives that. The words sent a chill through me, because I had heard them too. That certainty, that finality, that helps, I said. It does, she agreed. But we need more. Like what direct evidence of intent, she said. Something that shows this wasn't a moment of anger, that it was planned. I thought about that, about the conversations, the pressure, the way everything had been building. There's something else, I said slowly. Sheriff Carter leaned forward slightly. What? They tried to make me look unstable, I said, to take control legally. Her eyes sharpened. That's important, she said. Very important. I have records, I added. Copies. Notes. Everything I documented. A flicker of approval crossed her face. Good, she said. That strengthens your position. Silence settled between us again, but this time it felt different. Not heavy, focused, like something was taking shape. There's one more thing, she said carefully. I braced myself. Your grandson, she continued. Noah. My heart tightened instantly. What about him? He's spoken to us, she said. Not formally yet, but he heard things. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he had. He's scared, she added, but he wants to tell the truth. That hurt more than anything else, because he shouldn't have to. He's just a child, I said. I know, she replied, but his testimony could matter. I swallowed hard. This was the part no one prepares you for, the part where truth spreads beyond you, touches everyone, changes everything. I don't want him hurt, I said. He won't be, she said firmly. We'll protect him. Protect him. I nodded slowly. Then we do this, I said. Sheriff Carter held my gaze. Are you sure I didn't hesitate this time? Yes, because there was no other choice. Not anymore. Not after what they had done. Not after what they had tried to take. They need to be stopped, I said quietly. And they will be, she replied. As she stood to leave, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not yet, but direction. For the first time since the fall, I wasn't just reacting. I was moving forward, toward something, toward truth, toward justice, and maybe, someday, toward something that looked like healing. But first, there was a battle ahead. And this time, I wasn't walking into it blind. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in feeling. There's something about a room where truth is dissected, where memories are questioned, where pain is measured in evidence. that strips everything down to its sharpest edges. I sat at the witness table, my hands folded in my lap, feeling every movement in my ribs, every breath pulling slightly against the healing fractures beneath my skin. Across the room, Lauren sat beside Brandon. My daughter. She didn't look at me. Not once. Brandon did. He met my gaze calmly, almost confidently, like a man who believed he could still control the outcome of this story. But this wasn't his story anymore. It wasn't even theirs. It belonged to the truth now, and truth has a way of finding its voice. The prosecution began carefully, methodically. They didn't rush. They didn't dramatize. They built, piece by piece. First, the financial records, Brandon's failing developments, the mounting debt, the pressure from investors and lenders. Numbers don't lie, and those numbers told a clear story, one of desperation. Then came the documents, the inquiries about the mountain property, attempts to understand the clause, to find ways around it, to navigate something that was never meant to be bypassed. I watched as Brandon's attorney shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting papers, preparing for counter-arguments, but even he knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Then came Ryan. He walked into the courtroom slower than usual, a brace still supporting his leg, but his presence was steady, grounded, real. He took the stand, swore his oath, and spoke. "I remember the fall," he said. "Not all of it. But I remember enough." The room was silent. "I was on the trail," he continued. "Then I slipped. I don't remember hitting the ledge, just waking up there." He paused. "And then I heard them," he said. My heart tightened. The man's voice, Ryan went on. He said, "No one survives that." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Not loud, but undeniable. Because those words weren't speculation, they were certainty, and certainty doesn't belong to accidents. Brandon's attorney stood for cross-examination, his tone smooth, controlled. "Mr. Cole," he said, "you've stated that your memory of the event is incomplete. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ryan replied. "So it's possible that what you heard was misunderstood, misremembered." Ryan didn't hesitate. "No," he said. The attorney pressed. "You were injured, disoriented." "Under extreme stress, I know what I heard," Ryan said firmly. And just like that, the room shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough. Then it was Noah's turn. I felt it before I saw him, that tightening in my chest, that instinct to protect. He walked in slowly, smaller than he had ever looked to me, but standing straighter than I expected, braver than he should have had to be. He glanced at me once, just once, and I gave him the smallest nod. "You're not alone." He took the stand, swore his oath, and for a moment he just sat there, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "It's okay," the prosecutor said gently. "Take your time." Noah nodded. Then he spoke. "I heard them talking," he said. His voice was quiet, but clear. "My parents," he added, "the night before the hike." The room held its breath. They said, "It had to happen soon," he continued, "that they couldn't wait anymore." I closed my eyes briefly. Hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "What did you understand that to mean?" the prosecutor asked carefully. Noah hesitated. "Then that something was going to happen to my grandma." The words landed like a weight across the entire room. Even Brandon's attorney didn't interrupt immediately, because some truths are too direct to deflect. Cross-examination was softer this time. Careful, measured. "Do you love your parents?" the defense attorney asked. Noah looked down. "Yes," he said. "And you love your grandmother?" "Yes." "So you're in a difficult position, aren't you?" Noah nodded. "Yes." The attorney leaned in slightly. "Is it possible you misunderstood what you heard, that your parents were talking about something else?" Noah shook his head. "No," he said. "Why not?" He looked up then, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. Because of the way they said it, he answered. Silence. Not forced, not dramatic, just truth settling into place. When Noah stepped down, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Because he had done it. He had told the truth, even when it hurt, even when it broke something inside him. And that kind of truth changes things. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of my body, the strain in my ribs, the quiet ache that reminded me of exactly why I was here. I took the stand, swore my oath, and sat down. Mrs. Nichols, the prosecutor, began. "Can you tell the court what happened on the day of the incident?" I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I told it the way it happened. The trip, the conversation, the shift in tone, the moment everything changed. And then, the push, I said. The word hung in the air. Clear. Final. "Who pushed you?" the prosecutor asked. I looked across the room, at Lauren, at Brandon, and I answered. My daughter and her husband. Lauren's eyes flickered, just for a second, then dropped. Brandon didn't move. Not at all. Cross-examination came next. Expected. Prepared. The defense attorney approached with a calm, practiced expression. "Mrs. Nichols, he said you've experienced a traumatic event. Would you agree?" "Yes." "And trauma can affect memory, can it not?" "It can." He nodded as if we were agreeing. "As you fell," he continued, "you were disoriented, frightened, possibly confused." "I was aware," I said, "but you didn't see the exact moment clearly." "Did you?" he pressed. "Isn't it possible that you slipped?" "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. The attorney paused, then tried again. "You're certain?" "Yes." Beyond any doubt, I held his gaze. "Beyond any doubt." He studied me for a moment, then stepped back, because there was nowhere else for him to go. The final piece came unexpectedly, a voice message, recovered from Lauren's phone, partially deleted, but not gone. The courtroom grew still as it played, static. Then her voice, soft, tense. "If she won't sign, then this is the only way left." The recording ended, silence followed. Not the kind that waits for something else. The kind that knows that something has just been proven. Completely. Irrevocably. I didn't look at Lauren. I didn't need to, because in that moment, the truth had spoken for itself, and there was no way to silence it anymore. The day of the verdict felt suspended, as if time itself had decided to slow down just enough to make every second matter. I sat in the courtroom again, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling the quiet tension settle into my bones. The same room, the same people. But everything was different now, because this time there would be an ending, or at least the beginning of one. Lauren sat across from me, still, composed. Too composed. If someone had walked into that room without context, they might have thought she was just another woman waiting for a decision that had nothing to do with her. But I knew better. I had seen her at her most raw, her most desperate, her most dangerous. And yet, as I looked at her now, I didn't feel anger. Not the way I thought I would. What I felt instead was something quieter, heavier, grief. Because no matter what happened next, she was still my daughter, and that truth didn't disappear just because everything else had broken. Brandon sat beside her, his posture unchanged, his expression controlled as ever. But there was something different in his eyes now. Not confidence. Not anymore. Something closer to calculation, fading into uncertainty. Good, because uncertainty meant one thing. He no longer believed he could win. The jury filed in. 12 ordinary people. 12 lives that had been pulled into ours. 12 voices that would decide how this story ended. The room stood, then sat again. And just like that, it began. The judge's voice was steady, measured as he addressed the jury foreperson. "Have you reached a verdict?" A pause. "Yes, Your Honor." My breath caught. The words that followed came one by one. Clear. Unmistakable. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. The word echoed through the room like a final note. Not loud, but absolute. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of fraud and coercion, guilty. Each one landed with the same weight. Each one closing a door that could never be reopened. I didn't look at Brandon. I didn't need to. But I felt the shift beside him, the stillness breaking, the control slipping. Then, on all counts, guilty. The courtroom exhaled, a collective release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in relief, not entirely, because justice doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the fall, or the betrayal, or the truth that had been exposed in the worst possible way. But it does something else. It draws a line, and sometimes that line is the only thing that keeps you standing. When I opened my eyes again, Lauren was looking at me. For the first time since the trial began, her expression wasn't angry, or defiant, or even afraid. It was empty, like something inside her had finally collapsed under the weight of everything she had done. I held her gaze, not with judgment, not with forgiveness, just truth. And then she looked away. The sentencing came later. Years, decades, words that defined consequences in numbers, as if time itself could measure what had been broken. Brandon received the harsher sentence, the one the court reserved for those who lead, who plan, who push. Lauren's was different, still severe, still final, but shaped by something the court could not ignore. She had followed, she had agreed, but she had also hesitated, even if that hesitation came too late to matter. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell silent again. Victim impact statement. Such a clinical phrase for something so deeply human. I stood slowly, feeling the familiar ache in my ribs, the quiet reminder of everything that had led to this moment. I looked at the judge, at the jury, and then at them. I survived the fall, I began. My voice was steady, clear. But that wasn't the hardest part. I paused, let the words settle. The hardest part was understanding why I fell. Silence, deep, listening. I spent months asking myself what I missed. I continued, what I could have done differently, what I could have said, or not said. My gaze shifted to Lauren. But the truth is, this wasn't about a misunderstanding. Her eyes flickered. This was a choice I said, a series of choices that led to a moment where my own daughter stood on the edge of a cliff and helped push me off it. The words didn't break. They didn't shake, because they were no longer something I was trying to survive. They were something I had already lived through. The physical injuries will heal, I went on. They already are. I took a breath. But the deeper wound is knowing that I was no longer seen as a mother. My voice softened slightly. Just an obstacle. Lauren looked down, and for a moment, I saw it. Not guilt, not fully, but something close. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here because what happened to me should not happen to anyone. I turned back to the judge, to anyone who believes that silence is easier, that control is justified, that family can be used instead of protected. The room was completely still now. I survived because I refused to disappear, I said quietly. And I'm standing here today because the truth didn't disappear either. I stepped back, sat down, and let the moment pass. When it was over, when the courtroom began to empty, I didn't rush to leave. I stayed where I was, letting the reality settle, letting the noise fade, until there was nothing left but quiet. And in that quiet, I felt it. Not victory, not closure, but something smaller, stronger, a beginning. Because justice had been served. But healing was something else entirely, and I was just starting to understand what that meant. Healing doesn't arrive the way people expect it to. It doesn't knock on your door one morning and announce that everything is better. It doesn't erase the memories or soften the truth or restore what was broken. Healing is quieter than that. It begins in the small spaces, in the moments where you realize you can breathe without thinking about it, in the seconds where your body forgets just briefly that it once hit the ground harder than it should have survived. It begins when you decide to keep going. Months passed after the trial. Time didn't move quickly, but it moved. And with it, so did I. The physical recovery came first, slow, frustrating. Every movement a reminder of what had happened. The ribs healed eventually. The shoulder regained strength. The deep bruising faded into something less visible, less immediate. But the deeper healing, that took longer. I didn't go back to my old house. I couldn't. Not because it held bad memories, but because it held a version of me that no longer existed. Instead, I moved somewhere quieter. A small home just outside the town, closer to the mountains, but not too close. Far enough that I could see them, not so close that I felt their edge beneath my feet. Noah came with me. Not right away. There were processes, legal steps, conversations that felt far too complicated for a boy his age. But in the end, the court saw what mattered: stability, safety, truth. And one day he stood in the doorway of my new home, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking both uncertain and hopeful. "Is this really okay?" he asked. I smiled gently. "It is," I said, "as long as you want it to be." He stepped inside, slowly taking in the space, the quiet. "It's different," he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded. "Good different," he added. That was enough. We didn't try to rebuild everything all at once. We didn't pretend things were normal. We let things be what they were. Simple, honest, safe. Some evenings we sat on the porch and watched the sky change colors over the mountains. Noah would talk about school, about books, about the things that still made sense in his world, and sometimes he didn't talk at all. He just sat there. And that was okay too. Ryan visited once he was able, walking with a slight limp but steady, alive. "I guess we make a pretty good survival team," he said with a small smile. I returned it. "I'd say we proved that. We didn't talk much about the fall. We didn't need to. Some things don't need to be relived to be understood. But his presence, his continued existence, was a quiet reminder of something important. We had both been meant to disappear, and we hadn't. That mattered." Sheriff Carter checked in from time to time. Never intrusive, just present. "You're doing okay?" she asked during one visit. I considered the question. "Better," I said. She nodded as if that was exactly the answer she expected. Because better is honest. It doesn't promise perfection. It just means you're moving. Forward. The mountain property remained untouched, exactly as Tom had intended. Not because it was valuable, but because it was his. And some things aren't meant to be turned into something else. I went back there once. Not to the cliff, not to that edge, but to a lower trail, one that wound through trees and opened into a quiet clearing where Tom and I used to sit. I stood there for a long time, listening, not for danger, not for voices, just listening to the wind, to the quiet, to myself. And for the first time since that day, I didn't feel fear. I felt distance from the pain, from the moment, from the version of me who had stood at that edge and didn't yet understand what was about to happen. I didn't forgive Lauren, not in the way people expect. Forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's about releasing the hold the past has on you. And I was learning to do that, slowly, in my own way. I started something small. At first, it was just a few phone calls, connections through the hospice network I had worked with for years. Then it grew. A support group, a resource center, a place for older adults who felt pressure from family, from circumstances, from situations they didn't fully understand. People like me. People who needed someone to listen before it was too late. We named it simply the Nichols Foundation, not for recognition, but for meaning, for what Tom had built, for what had been protected, for what could now protect others. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk going through paperwork, Noah walked in quietly. "What are you working on?" he asked. "Something important," I said. "Something that might help people." He nodded thoughtfully. Then he looked at me. "Grandma." "Yes." He hesitated. "Then, when you told that man to play dead, did you think it would work?" I paused. The memory surfaced instantly. Sharp. Clear. I didn't know. I admitted. "Then why did you say it?" I looked at him, at the boy who had seen too much, and still chose truth. Because sometimes I said slowly, surviving isn't about fighting harder. He listened, really listened. Sometimes I continued, it's about choosing the moment when you don't move, so you can live long enough to move later. He thought about that, then nodded. "Like waiting," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Like waiting, but not giving up." He smiled slightly, and in that smile, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. That night after he went to bed, I sat alone for a while. The house was quiet, but not empty, not anymore. I looked out at the dark outline of the mountains in the distance, and I thought about that moment. The fall, the ledge, the whisper, play dead. At the time, it had been instinct, survival, the only choice I had left. But now I understood it differently. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was the decision to endure when everything else told you to give in, and that decision, it gave me something they never expected. Time, and time was enough to take everything back. There is a kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than anything else. The kind that comes from people you trusted, people you loved, people you believed would never see you as anything less than family. But life has a way of revealing truths we don't want to face. Sometimes the danger isn't outside your door. Sometimes it's already sitting at your table. And when that truth comes to light, you are left with a choice: to ignore it, to explain it away, or to face it. No matter how painful it is, what I learned is this: love without boundaries is not love. It is vulnerability waiting to be used. Trust without awareness is not strength. It is risk without protection. And survival is not always loud. It is not always brave in the way we imagine. Sometimes survival is quiet. It is patient. It is the moment you choose not to react, so you can live long enough to act. If you are watching this and something in your life feels off, don't ignore it. Don't silence that voice inside you. Pay attention. Ask questions. Protect yourself not just physically but emotionally and financially. Because your voice matters. Your life matters. And no one has the right to take that from you. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? What would you have done in my place? Do you believe forgiveness is necessary? Or is letting go enough? And if stories like this about truth, strength, and emotional justice mean something to you, take a moment to subscribe, and stay with me, because sometimes the stories we need to hear the most are the ones that remind us we're not alone.